Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection. Russia has demanded UN action to get all foreign military personnel out of Greece. Southern soft coal operators have not yet reached agreement with John L. Lewis, but the rest of the soft coal industry has resumed production. The House of Representatives has passed a tax reduction bill by more than the two-thirds which would be required to override a veto. Headline edition will bring you special reports and interviews in a moment.
The American Broadcasting Company and affiliated stations present Headline Edition with Taylor Grant. From all over the world, wherever the day's headlines are made, Headline Edition brings you accurate, timely reports on the news behind those headlines, plus informative in-person interviews with the men and women who made the headlines today. Today's edition presents a roundup of the latest developments in the finding of a flying disc, an eyewitness report of today's significant action in the UN Security Council, Ohio Congressman Thomas A. Jenkins commenting on today's House action on tax legislation, a special report on the status of soft coal negotiations, and the details of today's All-Star baseball game reported from Chicago. Stay in step with history in the making. Stay tuned to Headline Edition. And now, here's Taylor Grant.
Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week. Our correspondents in Los Angeles and Chicago have been in contact with Army officials endeavoring to obtain all possible late information. Joe Wilson reports to us now from Chicago.
The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucers. As a matter of fact, the 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs which landed on a ranch outside Roswell. The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brizzell was the man who discovered the saucer. Colonel William Blanchard of the Roswell Air Base refuses to give details of what the flying disc looks like. In Fort Worth, Texas, where the object was first sent, Brigadier General Roger Ramey says that it is being shipped by air to the AAF Research Center at Wright Field, Ohio. A few moments ago, I talked to officials at Wright Field, and they declared that they expect the so-called flying saucer to be delivered there, but that it hasn't arrived as yet. In the meantime, General Ramey describes the object as being of flimsy construction, almost like a box kite. He says that it was so battered that he was unable to determine whether it had a disc form, and he does not indicate its size. Ramey says that so far as can be determined, no one saw the object in the air, and he describes it as being made of some sort of tinfoil. Other Army officials say that further information indicates that the object had a diameter of about 20 to 25 feet, and that nothing in the apparent construction indicated any capacity for speed, and that there was no evidence of a power plant. The disc also appeared too flimsy to carry a man. Now, back to Taylor Grant in New York.
There was important activity within the UN Security Council today.
Newscaster in every newspaper across the nation has made headlines out of it, and this afternoon we are honored indeed to have here in our studio this man, Kenneth Arnold, who we believe may be able to give us a first-hand account and give you the same on what happened. Kenneth, first of all, if you'll move up here to the microphone just a little closer, we'll ask you to just tell in your own fashion, as you told us last night in your hotel room and again this morning, what you were doing there and how this entire thing started. Go ahead, Kenneth.
Well, at about 2:15, I took off from Chehalis, Washington, en route to Yakima. And, of course, every time that any of us fly over the country near Mount Rainier, we spend an hour or two in search of the marine plane that's never been found that they believe is in the snow someplace southwest of that particular area. That area is located at about, or its elevation is about 10,000 foot. And I had made one sweep in close to Mount Rainier and down one of the canyons and was dragging it for any types of objects that might prove to be the marine ship. And as I come out of the canyon there, it was about 15 minutes. I was approximately 25 to 28 miles from Mount Rainier. I climbed back up to 9,200 feet, and I noticed to the left of me a chain which looked to me like the tail of a Chinese kite kind of weaving and going at a terrific speed across the face of Mount Rainier. I at first thought they were geese because it flew like geese, but it was going so fast that I immediately changed my mind and decided it was a bunch of new jet planes in formation. Well, as the planes come to the edge of Mount Rainier, flying at about 160 degrees south, I thought I would clock them because it was such a clear day, and I didn't know where their destination was, but due to the fact that I had Mount St. Helens and Mount Adams to clock them by, I just thought I'd see just how fast they were going, since among pilots we argue about speed so much. And they seemed to flip and flash in the sun just like a mirror. And in fact, I happened to be at an angle from the sun that seemed to hit the tops of these peculiar-looking things in such a way that it almost blinded you when you looked at them through your plexiglass windshield. Well, it was about 1 minute to 3 when I started clocking them on my sweep second-hand clock, and as I kept looking at them, I kept looking for their tails. They didn't have any tails. I thought, well, maybe something's wrong with my eyes, and I turns the plane around and opens the window and looks out the window, and sure enough, I couldn't find any tails on them. And the whole observation of these particular ships didn't last more than about 2.5 minutes, and I could see them only plainly when they seemed to tip their wing or whatever it was, and the sun flashed on them. They looked something like a pie plate that was cut in half with a sort of a convex triangle in the rear. Now, I thought, well, that maybe they're jet planes with just the tails painted green or brown or something, and didn't think too much of it, but kept on watching them. They didn't fly in a conventional formation that's taught in our Army. They seemed to kind of weave in and out right above the mountaintops. And I would say that they even went down into the canyons in several instances, probably 100 feet. But I could see them against the snow, of course, on Mount Rainier, and against the snow on Mount Adams as they were flashing, and against a high ridge that happens to lay in between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams. But when I observed the tail end of the last one passing Mount Adams, and I was at an angle near Mount Rainier from it, but I looked at my watch and it showed 1 minute and 42 seconds. Well, I still thought, well, that's pretty fast, and I didn't stop to think what the distance was between the two mountains. Well, I landed at Yakima, Washington, and Al Baxter was there to greet me, and he told me I guess I better change my brand. But he kind of gave me a mysterious sort of a look that maybe I had seen something he didn't know. Well, I just kind of forgot it then till I got down at Pendleton, and I began looking at my map and taking measurements on it. And the best calculation I could figure out, now even in spite of error, would be around 1,200 miles an hour, because making the distance from Mount Rainier to Mount Adams in, we'll say, approximately 2 minutes, it's almost, it'd be around 25 miles per minute. Now, allowing for error, we can give them 3 minutes or 4 minutes to make it, and they're still going more than 800 miles an hour, and to my knowledge, there isn't anything that I read about outside of some of the German rockets that would go that fast. These were flying in more or less a level, constant altitude. They weren't going up and they weren't going down. They were just simply flying straight and level, and I laughed when I told the pilots at Pendleton, I said, they sure must have had a tailwind, but it didn't seem to help me much. But to the best of my knowledge and the best of my description, that is what I actually saw, and like I told the Associated Press, I'd be glad to confirm it with my hands on a Bible, because I did see it, and whether it has anything to do with our Army or our intelligence, or whether it has to do with some foreign country, I don't know. But I did see it, and I did clock it, and I just happened to be in a beautiful position to do it, and it's just as much a mystery to me as it is to everyone else who's been calling me the last 24 hours wondering what it was.
Well, Kenneth, thank you very much. I know that you've certainly been busy these last 24 hours because I've spent some of the time with you myself. And I know that the press associations, both Associated Press and our press, the United Press, has been right after you every minute. The Associated and United Press all over the nation have been after this story. It's been on every newscast over the air and in every newspaper I know of. The United Press in Portland has made several telephone calls here to Pendleton to me and to you this morning. And from New York, I understand they're after this story. And we may have an answer for it before night, because if it is some new type of Army or Navy secret missile, there will probably a story come out on it from the Army or Navy saying that it is a new secret plane, and that will be all there is to it, and they will hush up the story, or perhaps that we will finally get a definite answer to it. I understand the United Press is checking on it out of New York now with the Army and also with the Navy, and we hope to have some concrete answer before nightfall. We certainly want to thank you, Kenneth, for coming into our studio. We feel very pleased that this news, which is making nationwide news across the country, we are able to give our listeners over KWRC a first-hand report direct from you of what you saw. And we urge our listeners to keep tuned to this station, because anytime this afternoon or this evening that we get something on it on our United Press teletype, which is in direct communications with New York, Chicago, Portland, in fact every United Press bureau across the nation, why, we'll have it on the air.
This took place approximately in April 23, 1942, February 23, in Los Angeles, California. It was during a blackout, and there were many blackouts during the war period. About 1 a.m. in the morning, in the darkest of blackouts, the anti-aircraft started shooting off, just blowing the devil out of everything. We woke everyone up. Everyone come out, including the air raid wardens. I wanted to see what was going on, and I looked up in the sky, and way high were a formation of approximately 6 to 9 white, in other words, luminous white dots in a group, close formation. It appeared to me like it was a triangular formation. During this time, as I recall, it seems to me there were searchlights on them. Whether the searchlights remain on them all the time, I'm not sure. They came in from the northwest, and they went to the southeast, approximately. The anti-aircraft was only reaching 2/3 of the way up to these objects, which meant that these objects were fairly high, quite high. And some of this anti-aircraft, the shells, casings come down, and went in the restaurants, broke glass windows, and did some minor damage. As there were rumors going around after the day after and for a week that someone had seen a object or plane crash, I think, out in South L.A. and maybe another spot, I believe near Compton. In other words, there were these rumors going around like there had been a crash of something, but for weeks and months later, nothing was given out about this, and to this day, no one has admitted, actually, that a Japanese plane, officially, I'm pretty sure no one has admitted that it was a Japanese plane shot down. A few days or a week before, the Japanese had shelled the coast, I think about 40 or 50 miles north. And shelled, I guess, they tried to shell some oil wells, oil installations. There were some reports that the plane or two or three had been launched from these submarines, Japanese submarines, and had come over, and that the Japanese planes were the cause of all this commotion in anti-aircraft. The answer was that they launched 2 or 3 planes from submarines. I believe the night or two before, or the night or two after, there were another small flight or objects went over. Now these, I'm not denying that this could have been maybe 6, or so high balloons that might have retained their close formation.
Well, there had been sightings made from the ground, people seeing strange lights in the sky. And there had been a radar observation. It happened on a Saturday night, and it was carried in the papers throughout the country the next day, the reports of the sightings. And that didn't cause too much of a stir. However, the following Saturday night, the same thing happened. The ground radar at Washington International was picking up UFO returns. People were reporting eyewitness sightings of strange lights in the sky. And the press, having gone through this thing the week before, were better prepared, and they were down at the gate at the Washington International Airport and were asking for answers to their questions on what these things were that were being picked up by radar. Somehow they got the word that they were being picked up by radar, and so they called me at home, and I went on down there to see if we couldn't answer some of the questions. And when I got down there, why, Life magazine was there and a few other publications, some of the local newspapers. And we did ask the Air Defense Command to send up a flight of interceptors. They did send up a flight. The flight failed to see anything, although we were getting the target returns on the ground and trying to direct them to the targets. They failed to report that they saw anything, and subsequently they went back to Newcastle, Delaware, where they were based. And along about 2 or 3 in the morning, we asked for another flight because we were still getting these returns. And they sent up another flight, and this time one of the pilots reported that he did see a group of lights that we were trying to direct him to, or a group of targets. And he flew towards them, and obviously from his report, then they appeared to be all around him, which he reported to us. And then they moved off according to the ground radar, and according to his report, he said they're going away. And he then returned to the base, and that's about the gist of what happened in Washington that night.
Tell us some facts about the current fuss over flying saucers is Mr. James Ritchie of the Civil Aeronautics Authority, who is one of the men who first spotted and plotted the so-called saucers on radar at the Washington airport. Now, just so we understand each other, what do you folks who are professionals call these things which at least are described as flying saucers?
We call these things unidentified objects. Understanding the Air Force calls them indeterminate masses.
Indeterminate masses and unidentified objects. Well, I know that you, sitting in your radar room, which I understand is deep underground, or at least underground, you don't see the sky, have plotted these indeterminate masses, unidentified objects, flying saucers, I should not mention the word, on your scopes. And I also know that you've seen a great many of them that you brought in commercial pilots. What has actually happened?
Well, we've seen quite a few of them, John. Probably well over 100. We've seen these unidentified objects on our scopes. And all in all, we've had 24 times where the pilot flew to where we told him there was a pit. He would request that he would be vectored to it. We would vector him over to it. 24 different times, lights were seen. We had asked him to describe the light, describe the object. We'd either say it was a white light. Most of them said white light. One pilot said it was yellow, and it would go to red and back to yellow. We asked him to describe it. He said the only description he could give is it's very attractive. Other pilots saw two that he said were blue. So we've had them pretty well described in all different ways.
Well, now, I read that one, not your people, but the people in the Washington Tower felt that they had tracked one of these things for 8 seconds and determined the speed was about 7,200 miles an hour, which, of course, sounds fantastic. What, in your experience, what is your experience with the alleged speed of these unidentified masses?
Well, of course, we in the Washington Air Traffic Control Center have different type radar than that which is in the tower. Most that we track were going anywhere from 40 miles an hour to 90 miles an hour. On occasions, they were going 200, but normally that's 40 to 90.
40 to 90 miles an hour.
That's correct, sir.
Now, I know you called in the military, the Air Force people sometimes. What did the Air Force people do when they got up there with the jets and these lights?
Well, we would vector the Air Force people, the jets, to the saucers as they appeared on our scope. They would go after them, and they didn't seem to be able to make any enclosure on it. They would go down at the target, they would see a white light, and the target would pull away from them or disappear. They would see what they thought was the white light all around.
Well, now, what do you think about these signatures that you see on your scope?
That's a good question, John.
And now to our story. Major Donald Keyhoe is the director of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. As head of this private group interested in flying saucers, he has repeatedly attacked the United States Air Force and others for claiming that flying saucers are apparently flights of fancy and not flights by Martians or men from the moon. Independent surveys show that millions of Americans do share his belief in these celestial saucers. Major Keyhoe, first of all, let me ask you this. Most people in the United States, in spite of the fact that I say that millions do believe, I think you will agree that most people in the United States don't believe in flying saucers from outer space. They probably hold the view of columnist Bob Considine, who wrote that flying saucers are products of, for the most part, quote, pranksters, half-wits, cranks, publicity hounds, fanatics in general, and screwballs, end quote. How do you feel about Mr. Considine's charge?
Well, I know where he got the story. He got it from Colonel Watson out at the Air Technical Intelligence Center in Dayton. In fact, the colonel went even a little farther, and he said behind every sighting was an idiot, a crackpot, a religious fanatic. That included a lot of high-ranking Air Force pilots, incidentally, and many airline captains, people who were qualified to see these things. But he's just following out an Air Force policy.
Well, now, you're not suggesting that Bob Considine is in the pay of the Air Force. He's an independent man with a considerable reputation.
I mean the colonel. No, I have every respect for Bob Considine.
In spite of the fact that he suggests that pranksters, half-wits, and screwballs are responsible for the stories about flying saucers.
Well, I wish I could show him any time a list of about 800 witnesses, some of the big names in aviation, including up to the rank of colonel in the Air Force. They're still flying and they're still carrying passengers. They've never been grounded. They're still guiding airliners in, the radar men are, night after night in bad weather. If the screwballs and incompetence, why are they still on the job?
Major Keyhoe, where do you think flying saucers are coming from?
I don't know. There is an indication that they could be using Mars as a base. I don't mean they originate there, but every time Mars has approached us in the last 10 years, there's been a noticeable increase in saucer sightings. And that's been mentioned officially. In fact, the Canadian official project, on the basis of that, set up an observation station in Canada.
You say the Canadian official project. What do you mean by the official?
There was an official project called Project Magnet. They set up an observatory at Shirley Bay to try to track these things. And
what happened to the official project? You say there was a project.
Yes, they ran for about a year, and they had one sighting on the gravimeter, which indicated that something, a very large object, had flown over there. But they finally decided they were spending a little too much money on it, I suppose.
Well, certainly they wouldn't have thought that they were spending too much money on it if they believed that that kind of phenomena existed.
A lot of people on the project are still working up there on their own time, and certain government officials have still kept the lid on their reports in Canada, just as they do down here.
What is your theory? In other words, you suggest that they come from Mars or from other planets, from other solar systems possibly throughout the universe. Is that correct?
Yes, and there are a lot of scientists who said the same thing.
What is your theory as to the kind of people who fly these, or the kind of beings who fly these saucers?
Well, that's speculation. Willie Lay said recently they'd be just like the man next door, the invaders from space, and his reasons may be good. But most of the top scientists have said that the odds are that beings from other worlds would not be like us. Some of them would be. Dr. Hollis Shapley, for instance, said that there probably were at least 100 million inhabited planets in the universe. And Menzel, who doesn't believe in saucers at all, says that he goes that high or even higher. And among those, they must be, by the law of averages, a certain number of planets that would be like the Earth. And if evolution started at the same time, why, you might have the same type of being.
What do you think of the intentions of these people, for lack of a better name, of these people who are in these flying saucers?
Well, there's been no evidence of any hostility. During the last 10 years, what we call the modern phase, there have been sightings before then. There have been some accidents, Air Force pilots chasing these things. Captain Mantell was killed chasing one in 48, and 2 pilots disappeared chasing one in 53 over Lake Superior. But I think those were just accidents.
Just accidents. Why don't they try to communicate with us? What's your theory about that?
Well, I'll follow some of the theories the Air Force people have said. They suggested to me back in 52 and 53, at which time we were cooperating. I had a lot of very good friends in the Air Force at that time. The policy was to give out the information. They were about to tell the people everything they had. And the theory was then that perhaps these beings were so much different from us that communication would be a very hard thing. They might not, for instance, have speech sounds like ours. That's one answer. Another thing, they might not be able to exist in our atmosphere. We're going to land on the moon, we'll have to wear spacesuits or else build air-conditioned buildings up there, air pressure. There could be lots of factors like that.
Well, do you think they're down here when we do see them to look at us?
I think that's probably a long-range survey.
A long-range survey.
That's right.
And yet no attempt, as far as we know in any case, of communication with us.
There have been claims of communication, but most of those have been by individuals. The Air Force has not admitted that there's ever been one, and I don't know. Our committee hasn't found any cases that we would accept as absolutely verified.
All right, now, let's go at it from another point of view, if I may, the Air Force point of view. They agree, undoubtedly, objects have been seen in the sky. But the Air Force has said time and time again, and this is a quote from Richard Horner, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Research and Development. All but a small percentage of these reports of unidentified flying objects have been definitely attributed to natural phenomena that are neither mysterious nor dire, end quote. Weather balloons, mirages, ordinary sky phenomena like meteors, airplanes themselves. What about that?
I'll answer that, but I'd like to make several points doing it. In 1947, the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Dayton, the top Air Force intelligence men and scientists under contract, sent a secret document to the commanding general of the Air Force saying that whatever these things were, they were real. In 1948, ATIC, the same group, sent a top secret estimate to the commanding general, Hoyt Vandenberg, said these were interplanetary spaceships. In 1952, there was an intelligence analysis of the maneuvers of these things, as seen by radar, triangulation, radar photographs, and in 53, the Central Intelligence Agency and the Air Force had a special panel of scientists meet at the Pentagon to tell them what to do. And after they got through, this group said, you don't have proof that these things exist, not scientific proof, but you have a very strong circumstantial case. We suggest you quadruple the investigation, set up special observation posts, and in the meantime, release everything you've got to the American people. Now, you've got 4 documents there that they've been sitting on all this time. Now, and they have been spending a lot of money investigating flying saucers. If they don't exist, why the money? Why did the intelligence teams rush out every time there's a sighting?
Now then, you have mentioned 4 documents that you claim exist. We've heard in the past that you have claimed that these documents existed. We've seen your literature in which you talk about the existence of those documents. So we spoke with the Air Technical Intelligence Center at the Pentagon earlier this week, and this is what we were told officially by them. 3 of the 4 documents Major Keyhoe refers to simply do not exist. The 4th document does exist. You can have a copy of it, Mr. Wallace, and you can see that it doesn't say what Major Keyhoe claims it says. We have a copy of it, and I quote to you from the copy. The Air Force document says just this. The panel recommends that the national security agencies take immediate steps to strip the UFOs of the special status they have been given and the aura of mystery they have unfortunately acquired. We suggest an integrated program designed to reassure the public of the total lack of evidence of inimical forces behind the phenomena. And again, as I point out, Secretary Horner says it simply ain't so. Now why? The point really at issue here, it would seem, Major Keyhoe, is this. Why do you believe that the Air Force says that nothing is going on. Why do you believe that it's a fairly serious charge?
I know it is.
You make the charge that the United States government is withholding from the people of the United States certain very important information. Why? What would their motive be for withholding that kind of information from us?
Well, I'll answer that, but I would also like to show you some proof that they are withholding it. The reason that was given to me when they were working with me back in 52 and 53 was, first, that they were afraid of hysteria. Remember the Orson Welles show way years back when he scared people into the hills with the idea of invading Martians? Then they were also afraid that it would upset organized religion. That was a smaller factor, but there was some fear of it. Later, they were afraid that these accidents, when interceptors had chased these things and had been lost or had crashed, might be considered proof of hostility. Now, I would never have put my name on anything if it were a matter of personal opinion. I've talked to and read the reports of hundreds of pilots and radar men and guided missile trackers who've seen these things, and some of them are very important names. The Air Force says they have this down to 1.9%, but you'll notice the word current in there. They mean we are currently explaining. Now, I have in my possession a copy of Special Report 14, which is their Bible on this. In the back, it has a table showing that 3,201 cases they examined, 19.5% were unsolved, and they admit they still are unsolved. You add up what they've had since then, it makes over 12% of the reports. And those are mostly from the best possible sources.
Well, now, wait just a second. I'll use your figures. The Department of Defense released an official bulletin on November 5th, 1957, saying that from June of 55 to June of 57, a 2-year period, just a fraction over 2% of all investigated unidentified flying objects had to be listed as unknown. 2%. So that's your 1.9.
What was the period again?
55 to 57. The rest were determined to have been balloons, airplanes, hoaxes, and a category about 12% called insufficient information, which means that the report was so flimsy that there was simply nothing to check on. I must confess that they've certainly shown me no classified material, but they have opened their files quite willingly to us in our preparation for this program tonight. And they've given us very convincing evidence, Major Keyhoe, that it is largely, I shouldn't say largely, I'll say 99 and 44 100% a hoax. Now, you mentioned a hoax. Well, when I say a lot
of good pilots hoax.
No, not hoax. I thank you for correcting me. Not just a hoax, but let's say misinformation or sightings of objects which seem to be one thing but are in fact another. I'm glad that you corrected me about the hoax, because it was by no means that much a hoax. But you mentioned that Dr. Donald Menzel, who's a professor of astrophysics at Harvard before. Now, I think you will agree that he's one of the world's most distinguished astrophysicists. Is that not so?
I think there are others who are equally capable, but do not agree with him.
He is one of the world's most distinguished astrophysicists, so I think we can agree on that. In any case, he stresses, you see, that pilots are not expert observers, that they, as well as others, can see flying saucers when it's only, to quote him, the wrapper off somebody's lunch blowing around in the air, end quote. But again, let's come back to the point, the most important point, Major Keyhoe, and that is why will the Air Force, why will the United States government withhold information from United States citizens? For what reason?
Because they're treating them like children, the way they did with the H-bomb at first, and the way they've been doing with other things. Now, I'm not attacking the United States Air Force. I'm attacking a small group in there that has been persistently keeping this from the public, just as they've kept other things. For a long time, you couldn't even mention the idea that we could be hit by missiles from submarines from the Gulf and from both coasts very easily. I knew that years and years ago and tried to get it out, and at the time was discouraged about it. Now, you mentioned this denial of these documents. Now, I'd like to tell you something that happened on the Armstrong Circle Theater. I had requested that those points be in the script, and I was discouraged from it at first by the writer. Then later, some of our Board of Governors insisted that we have those points included. So I said, either I don't go on or we have those in there. They said, all right. So the script was completely rewritten. Now, those were in the script as it was first rehearsed, but when the second rehearsal came along, and the Air Force saw the mimeograph sheet, the Air Force representative, according to the Armstrong writer, said they would immediately deny it on the air, even though it meant denouncing their own former project chief. Now, the source for this is Captain Edward Ruppelt, who was the head of Project Blue Book for 2 years, and at that time he was considered good enough that he briefed President Truman on these things. He was the top man. Rank didn't mean anything. It's the experience that counted. All right. He says these things existed. He put it in a book which was cleared by security and review in the Air Force. On December 5th, 1955, that was cleared. It's in his book. He's never been hauled in and court-martialed. Now, I have here, and if you'll allow your camera to come in on it, this is the sheet from the script of the Armstrong Theater, which was deleted. This was crossed off, and I was told that I couldn't say it on the air. Now, that was censorship by intimidation. This can be matched up with the other sheets from the Armstrong Circle script, and any typewriter expert will show you.
Well, I'm certain
they ordered it taken out.
I'm certain that people believe you. The only thing is that the next morning I distinctly remember reading a report by you, Major Keyhoe, to the effect that no censorship, no pressure of any kind has been put on you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wallace. I know that statement almost by heart.
Yes.
I said that CBS and the Armstrong people were not to blame for cutting me off the air when I tried to mention the fact that the Senate committee was working on the secrecy angle. I never mentioned this that night to anyone because I had promised that I wouldn't say anything about it on the air, the Armstrong people. It was taken out, and I will do this. I will ask the United States Air Force to have the Marine Corps put me on active duty for court-martial if that is not the case.
Major Keyhoe, I understand you have 3 new reports on file, which in your opinion, you have them currently on file, and they're new reports. And these, in your opinion, would convince every person in this country that flying saucers are a fact. Is that correct?
They should convince a lot of people because of the names involved.
Tell us about it.
I told your interviewer in Washington that I couldn't mention the names because they were too high. One of them is a top scientist in this country whose name would be known to everybody.
Why wouldn't he want his...
Because he's afraid of the official ridicule.
He's afraid of official ridicule?
That's right.
More afraid of official ridicule than of possibly alerting the country to a serious national danger?
It's surprised how many people give us reports and they say, please keep my name confidential. Well, I'll give you one report which came to us. The name has to be thrust out. In 1951, a UFO circled the fleet in Korean waters. It circled it at high speed, and they launched several planes to try to get a close in on it. They got a radar lock on. That is, the radar was guiding the planes toward the object. This was picked up by radars on 14 naval vessels. This object circled about for half an hour more, and then it took off at a speed way over in excess of 1,000 miles an hour. This report was certified, and 9 members of our Board of Governors saw it, signed it, and agreed that they had seen it, and agreed to the contents. There is another report that just came in from 4 top missile designers, engineers, at one of the big plants in this country. They saw an elliptically shaped object and 2 small round disc-shaped objects flying with it over California, November 11th, 1957, at a speed of at least 5,000 miles an hour. These men are well qualified to know what they see. With broad daylight, not a cloud in the sky. There have been cases even where the Air Force has shot at these things. Now, if there's nothing there and they don't exist, why do they shoot at them? You mentioned Mr. Horner. The day after Mr. Horner said that the Air Force was not concealing anything, Captain Gregory Oldenburg, a public information officer at Langley Field, refused to let an ad be inserted in the Langley-based Flyer, their newspaper, which asked that anybody interested in UFOs please communicate and form a little group. He said, I must refuse to do this because the dissemination of information on UFOs is contrary to Air Force policy and Air Force Regulation 200-2. And I have a copy of it here in case you want to see it.
Well, Major Keyhoe, I must say that the Air Force tells us they don't question your motive, but they do question the accuracy of a good deal of your information, and for that reason they say you have been, and were they to, in a sense, throw open an invitation to all people who sight UFOs to get in touch with them once again. They get all kinds of cranks, hoaxers, and so forth, and you see they run down every one of these sightings, and it has cost them a tremendous amount of money to no avail over the past few years.
That's what they told you.
That is what they told me. Now, sir, in a moment I'd like to ask you this. In the past few years, millions of flying saucer enthusiasts have become excited about the stories of two men, George Adamski and Howard Menger. Both of them claim to have seen flying saucers. Menger claims to have been given a ride in one by some creatures from Venus. Adamski says he's chatted with a man from Venus in the California desert. I'd like to get your reaction to those stories, and we'll get Major Keyhoe's reaction on the flying saucer. Do you believe them?
No.
You think they are hoaxers?
We do not accept any reports of these so-called contactees without more evidence. We've asked them to submit their claims and take a lie detector test. We don't throw them out. We simply say we'll give you a fair chance. I think that's the least important part of the picture. The most important part is the weight of evidence from hundreds of competent people. And I'd like to name a few. Captain Richard Case, American Airlines. Captain C.S. Childs, Eastern Airlines. Captain T. Kravitz, TWA. Robert Dickus, TWA. Colonel Donald J. Blakely, U.S. Air Force, a wing commander. I could get down the list of people who know what they're doing, and they're still on duty, they're still flying.
Major Keyhoe, what would you like to see done about flying saucers that is not currently being done? What steps would you like to see taken?
I think the American people should write to their congressman and insist that open hearings be held by the Senate Committee on the Permanent Committee on Government Operations, which has been looking into this for 6 months.
An Air Force spokesman told us this last week. He said members of the Senate subcommittee have talked with us already, and they have shown no interest in conducting any hearings on this issue.
I talked with the chief investigator within the last 2 weeks. I gave him a lot of information, and I gave him data on one case where an airliner was sent to chase one of these things, and the passengers kept in ignorance of it at that time. That involved 2 government agencies beside the Air Force, which is refused to release the report. And I'll say that if you were to get, if the committee were to get Rupa, Major Fournet, several colonels around that time, Major Jones Garland, who was on the project, it would be a big revelation, because the Air Force is simply treating the American people like children. They don't trust them with the facts.
You know, here's an interesting question, Major. The United States and Russia have started sending satellites into the sky, and we may be hitting the moon with a rocket soon, possibly Mars. You believe that creatures from outer space have space stations on Mars. What's going to happen when we start firing rockets at the moon or at Mars?
That question's already been brought up. We expect to have a base on the moon within the next 5 years. It's possible that there is a base on that. I don't say there's any proof of it.
Is it possible we're going to start an interplanetary war when we start sending our rockets to the moon and to Mars?
In 1955, General Douglas MacArthur said the next war would be an interplanetary war, and we'd have to unite against people from other planets.
One last question, Major Keyhoe. Have you ever seen a flying saucer?
I've seen them tracked on radar, but I take the word of about 800 of the best witnesses in this country and abroad.
But you yourself have never seen a flying saucer?
I've just been a reporter, and a careful one.
Thank you very much, Major Donald Keyhoe. As you've just heard, the flying saucer controversy is deadlocked in contradictory statements and interpretation of facts. As for Major Donald Keyhoe himself, like most of us, he's never seen a flying saucer, which may just make him like a mystic who's never seen a ghost. But one must give him credit. He has much faith.
The majority conclusion is that these things are real and under intelligent control.
None of the evidence that I have examined would indicate any proof at all that we are being visited by extraterrestrials.
Those are the voices of this country's 2 leading specialists on unidentified flying objects. Today's Spectrum 95 probes the controversy and mystery surrounding the flying saucer flap. This is Al Moffat, KPRZ News, reporting on a controversy heard from outside barbershops all the way to the halls of Congress. Is there such a thing as a flying saucer? In a moment, you'll hear the actual voices of people describing those they think they've seen. But first, this message. Some authorities claim sections of the Bible refer to UFOs. Most agree the history of flying saucers date back 200 years. During World War II, they were around, but called Foo Fighters. But no serious investigation began until the things got a name. A private pilot in Nevada named Kenneth Arnold in 1947 saw more than 7 discs flying some distance from his plane. He was asked to describe them. He said they looked like saucers, and the name stuck. The Air Force started its investigation of flying saucers. These things were generally laughed off as figments of somebody's imagination until the Washington flap in 1952. The information officer for the Air Force's investigation of UFOs was Al Chop. He lives near Houston today and is Deputy Public Affairs Officer for the Manned Spacecraft Center. He describes what happened in Washington that night.
Well, there had been sightings made from the ground, people seeing strange lights in the sky. There had been a radar observation that happened on a Saturday night, and it was carried in the papers throughout the country the next day, the reports of the sightings. And that didn't cause too much of a stir. However, the following Saturday night, the same thing happened. The ground radar at Washington International was picking up UFO returns, and people were reporting eyewitness sightings of strange lights in the sky. And the press, having gone through this thing the week before, were better prepared, and they were down at the gate at the Washington International Airport and were asking for answers to their questions on what these things were that were being picked up by radar. Somehow they got the word that they were being picked up by radar, and so they called me at home, and I went on down there to see if we couldn't answer some of the questions. And when I got down there, why, Life magazine was there and a few other publications, some of the local newspapers. And we did ask the Air Defense Command to send up a flight of interceptors. They did send up a flight. The flight failed to see anything, although we were getting the target returns on the ground and trying to direct them to the targets. They failed to report that they saw anything, and subsequently they went back to Newcastle, Delaware, where they were based. And along about 2 or 3 in the morning, we asked for another flight because we were still getting these returns. And they sent up another flight, and this time one of the pilots reported that he did see a group of lights that we were trying to direct him to, or a group of targets. And he flew towards them, and obviously from his report then they appeared to be all around him, which he reported to us. And then they moved off according to the ground radar, and according to his report, he said they're going away. And he then returned to the base, and that's about the gist of what happened in Washington that night.
Those UFOs were high in the sky, but some were reported from other parts of the country more down to earth, such as the UFO Mrs. Paul Trent of McMinnville, Oregon, said she saw in the early 50s.
And I happened to look up, and I seen this thing, and I ran into the house to tell him about it. He went one way after a camera, and I went the other way after a camera, and between the both of us, we found it.
Can you tell us what it looked like?
Well, about the best thing I could say would be just about the size of a parachute, without any strings or anything like that. It was all flat on the bottom, and it was silvery color. That was about the only thing it was, that there was no smoke, no noise either one.
How close to the ground would you say it was?
Well, it was just above the electric light wires away. I just, the distance and stuff, I just don't know. It kind of hovered for a while, just like that, and he took the picture, and right just as soon as he took the picture, he wound the film to reroll, to take another one. And as soon as he took it, it turned and just took off very fast.
And the report of Alfred Ernst, a Minnesota farmer, of an object that landed.
It was hard to look at. I suppose about the size of a washing machine tub. One of these washing machines. Not a tub, but I mean the machine part, the tub part of it. So I suppose it could be 3 feet or so around. And it wasn't the easiest thing to look at. It was fairly bright.
In Dickinson, North Dakota, several years ago, a UFO skipped around over a drive-in theater. That sighting had a whole crowd of witnesses. The voice of Randall Young.
My wife and I were at the Dickinson drive-in, and it was a clear night. A lot of stars were out. And the wife called my attention to one star in particular, which was back of the screen a little ways, and asked me to watch it for a few seconds, which I did. And the star moved, what appeared to be a star, moved back and forth sideways several times. And then it traveled slowly towards the center of the theater there and stopped approximately over the top of the drive-in theater. And here again, it made several more sideways movements, and about the time I figured that it wasn't an airplane because it was just a white light, something similar to a star. And when it got directly over the theater, I got out of the car and looked at the thing, and it seemed to be an oval, flat shape. When it got over the theater, you could make out some type of outline of it as the height. I don't know just exactly.
About what size did it appear to you then?
Oh, it was probably, I'd say about the size of a dishpan or so.
It's common for a sighting to spark a chain of other accounts. Many of them vary widely from the original. Listen to this housewife's account and make your own judgment.
We were up on the second floor, and I looked out the kitchen window, and I saw this thing hovering near the Dickinson water tower, and it glowed a yellowish orange. At first, I thought it was the moon, but I've never seen a perfectly squared 1/4 of the moon. I took another look, and I thought, well, I better get my husband up, so about the time I decided to leave the window to go get him up, the thing started to change shape. And as it changed shape, as if it threw in rockets, and the smoke of an orangish yellow bellowed from the bottom of this thing. And then it just moved off in an easterly direction.
An account of that North Dakota flap is told by Airman Don Gebauer, who was in the control tower of Minot Air Force Base when reports began.
I was working before the midnight shift, and this person called in. They said they thought they saw a plane go down. Said they saw some bright lights in the air, and then they spotted it going down, and then further down they got the brighter light stuff. And so we took a report on that to begin with, and then about 30 minutes later we got a call from a mobile unit from the air police that guard the missile sites out there. Well, they said they saw the same thing, but it went down, and it came straight down from, they figured, about 20,000 feet. Came down to about 500 feet above the ground. And then they said it shot east of their, heading to Minot. I don't know the sound there. But anyway, and then it went straight, after it got down, it went straight across for about 5-10 minutes. Then it went back up and headed back west again.
Now, this couldn't possibly have been a plane?
No, it wasn't, because I checked RAPCON, which is a radar consists of covering right around 500 miles of the area around here. And they did not have nothing except for B-52 in the air, and that was our own B-52.
In 1956, a group of men with more than a passing interest in flying saucers formed a private, non-profit organization which they called the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP. From its start, this organization has been headed by a retired Marine pilot, Major Donald Keyhoe. He and his co-workers and some 5,000 volunteers conduct their own investigations of sightings. Keyhoe has been, from the start, very critical of Air Force investigations and what he calls the withholding of facts. Recently, Keyhoe called a news conference in Washington to say these things are from outer space. He cited many of what he termed prime examples, such as what happened in Exeter, New Hampshire last year.
Recently, in the famous Exeter case up in New Hampshire, and probably most of you are familiar with that, the Air Force did publish an answer and later retracted it. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, this was a report by two veteran policemen that were Exeter, New Hampshire, and a teenager, about 19 years old, who first saw this device and went to the police. They went out to the scene and skeptically, and when they got there, they found exactly what he had described, a very large object hovering close to the ground with light flashing in sequence, creating such a blinding glare that it lit up the ground for about 300 feet. It even caused animals in nearby buildings which couldn't see this object to get upset, horses kicking their stalls and whinnying and so on. Now this was we made this report public, and it was picked up by John Fuller of Saturday Review of Literature and later published in Look. And somehow that had more effect than any group of sightings that we put out in the last 5 years, probably because of his prestige and the fact that he didn't have any axe to grind. He really went up there and taped interviews with all of the witnesses and came back and said there seems to be no doubt that this thing was there and it's real. The Air Force had first said that this was a mistake caused by low-flying aircraft, and the police officers were very much incensed by being called incompetent. They stated, well, this was wrong. They were not low-flying aircraft. This was definitely an unidentified flying object. The same thing happened in another case that very same night, which is not so well known, down in Texas. On the night of September 3rd, two deputy sheriffs saw a strange object in the sky, and they parked their cruiser with the lights on near the side of the highway to watch it.
They were Brazoria County Chief Deputy Billy McCoy and Deputy Sheriff Robert Good, both of Angleton. We asked Chief Deputy McCoy to describe the encounter.
As we were leaving Damon, I noticed off over on the right-hand side of the highway there, going towards West Columbia, I noticed a bright purple light over there. It looked like it was right on the horizon. We were talking about various things, and I called this light to Mr. Good's attention, knowing that he was real familiar with that area over there. And he said, well, it's probably a light on a pumping station or a light over to a ranch. They've been putting quite a few of those mercury vapor lights in. I said, well, it just looked too purple to be a mercury vapor light to me. And we continued driving, didn't stop at that time. And I kept watching the light, and as we traveled down the highway, there appeared to be a blue light just seemed to appear right out of this purple light. We were just almost parallel with the light. And as we drove, well, this light, the blue light, seemed to move further over to the right. We pulled over on the right-hand side of the road and stopped and got out and looked at the light briefly. The blue light had moved a good ways from the purple light at this time. We made a U-turn there and stopped on the other side of the highway and got out and looked at these lights through binoculars. At this time, the lights seemed to float up in the air, just a bare few degrees above the horizon and just hangs suspended there. So we got back in the car to drive back towards Damon to take one of the back roads to go over towards the San Bernard River to see if we could get closer to it. And we had driven, I guess, about a half a mile back towards Damon. We almost stopped again. We didn't pull off the highway. We just barely creeping. There was no traffic on the highway, and Good had his window down on his side, and he observed the lights again with the binoculars, and they seemed to still be in the same position as they were. So he laid the binoculars down and said, well, you watch it, and I'll drive on back that way. And just as we started up, he said, are the other lights still there? And I said, man, they're not there. They're right here on us. Well, the object had moved just in a blink of an eye, it seemed like, where they were to right beside the highway. The purple light was illuminating the inside of a patrol car, ground all around us. And here this thing was, just about, looked like it wasn't any more than 100, 150 feet in the air. It was right out the side of the highway, completely motionless. There was a bright, almost full moon, almost directly overhead. The moon illuminated the object. We could see the outline very distinctly. We could see the shadow on the ground underneath it, and my gosh, it looked like a football field.
The flying saucer controversy raged anew last month when hundreds of people around Hillsdale, Michigan, saw a series of strange objects or things. The county sheriff there said this.
The bright light, the bluish-green light, and so on, maneuverability from side to side, up and down. And a saucer-like shape to it. Mr. Manor, him and his son were out in the farm and observed this object go down into the swamp area. At the same time, we had 6 other cars out there, and a University of Michigan professor, they also observed the same thing, and everybody described the thing as the same. No sound to the darn things at all.
Do you have any idea as to what they might be?
I wish I did. I've had more phone calls here this morning than you take a stick at. I'm going to put a call into the defense office in Washington, see if they can come up with some answers for me. I'm going to have to call the government on this. Because we've got a lot of people who have seen this. Got over 50 people who have seen it at different times, different intervals. Everybody describes the things the same way.
Do you think, Sheriff, these might be visitors from outer space?
I don't even want to guess at this. I don't believe it yet, but I can't doubt my men. Quoting one of my officers this morning, he said, Sheriff, I've seen it, but I still don't believe it.
A co-ed at the university in Hillsdale saw the thing and described it like this. Sarah Robichuk.
Last night around 11:30, we'd been watching the storm that was taking place here. And we looked out our second floor dorm window and saw what appeared to be a house almost in the middle of the arb. But we realized there wasn't a house there, so we kept watching it, and it had a yellow glow, and the lights were fluctuating. And we watched it for a while, and it was hovering, or seemed to be, because the lights were fluctuating and almost going around. And so we called the civil defense because we'd been asked to call and give a direction and a time. And he called the police. And as they drove up the Arab Road, their red lights bothered whatever we were seeing because it moved up and down and to the right and left. Mm-hmm. And the lights fluctuated even more. Mm-hmm. And then they came back down the road, and the civil defense man drove around the back of our dorm, and his lights shone across the arb. And this also bothered it because it became very bright, and then it became very dim, and it started to move back across the horizon. So we kept watching it, and the civil defense man came up to our room to watch it, and he watched it for about a half an hour, and he said he would say it was definitely a UFO.
That civil defense director is William Van Horn. His report is considered by NICAP one of the most authoritative ever received.
Looked out the open window. Here the UFO was approximately 1,000 to 1,500 yards from us. I observed this with binoculars. To the right was a red light, and to the left was a white light. A red light at the time that I first observed it was a dim orange in color, and the white light was a quite dim white. The beacon from the airport sweeping over the area was coming around there, and the object seemed to get within a certain distance of the bottom portion of the beacon ray of light and became stationary. It appeared as if it were attempting to avoid this light from the beacon. It would then remain there for just a few moments and then start its descent back down, and as it were coming back down to the ground, approaching the ground, the lights would become dim. This, in essence, is what we observed at that time, Tony, and through the binoculars, I estimated the distance between the two lights to be approximately 20 to 25 feet.
The Air Force's chief UFO investigator is a Northwestern University astrophysics professor named J. Allen Hynek. He went to Hillsdale, investigated, and reported the citizens had seen swamp gas. Whether Hynek was right or not, there are sure to be many co-eds and citizens of Hillsdale who'll remember that incident the rest of their lives. For instance, Madeline English, do you believe in UFOs?
About 1 o'clock, I was looking out the window, and I saw a white glowing object with red lights, and it wasn't an airplane. Yes, I believe in UFOs.
Joe Wilson, were you frightened?
Of course I was frightened, wouldn't you be?
I'm not sure.
Well, when you see something strange out your window, especially out a girl's dorm window, and lights, and you don't know what they are, and you watch for 2 hours, you're frightened.
A series of UFO sightings that have been reported. Confused? If so, you're not alone. In the next section of Spectrum 95, we try to get an answer to the simple question, what is it? We've subtitled it, Would You Believe Swamp Gas? But now let's pause for the news. Spectrum 95. Part 2, the flying saucer flap, what is it? The question, what is it, seems simple on the surface. But with unidentified flying objects, it's complicated by the fact that there are no materials ever taken from a UFO, only reports of eyewitnesses. The director of NICAP, Major Donald Keyhoe, has little doubt what these things are. Here's his opinion.
Now, these have been evaluated. These sightings have been evaluated by our staff, by scientists, engineers in their various fields. The majority conclusion is that these things are real and under intelligent control. Now, in that group which has reached that conclusion, there is another group, and it's the majority of that one, which believes that these things must be extraterrestrial because they are so far superior to anything we have. They base this on absolutely tracked speeds by radar, visual tracking, and combinations. Now, either all of these witnesses, every one of them, all of the thousands of witnesses here and abroad are absolutely wrong, honestly wrong, but they're wrong. They're unable to distinguish what they see in the sky, and I'm talking about pilots now. They cannot read radar scopes as well as they should. They can't track things with the cine-theodolites or modern tracking devices. They make mistakes. All of them are wrong. Not one single man is right, or else these things are real, and there is secrecy, and the facts are being withheld.
Flying saucers arouse so much public interest, there are several organizations established and many salaries paid to find out what they are or just to talk about them. Another who makes his living from flying saucers is the editor of a magazine called Flying Saucer News, published in California. James Moseley tells his opinion.
These things are able to make right-angle turns. They make no noise, such as our jets make, and they travel at speeds which are incredible even today. So I don't believe it's anything that we have here on Earth as far as the known Earth governments are concerned.
You're convinced they're things?
Absolutely solid objects, yes, sir.
Why?
Because in some cases they've even bounced bullets off them. In many cases, teenagers out in California a couple of months ago shot at one of these things and heard the ping of the metal before the object took off.
What might be there? UFO means unidentified flying object.
Well, of course, we think that it could be from another planet, but we can't prove it. It could be some part of our natural environment of the Earth, which is unknown to our present-day science. If I knew what flying saucers really were, I'd be perhaps in Washington as an advisor to the government. I certainly don't know what they are.
As we mentioned, the chief Air Force investigator is Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
None of the evidence that I have examined would indicate any proof at all that we are being visited by extraterrestrials.
How many unexplained cases are there?
Something like 646 out of 10,000.
But you're confident there are explanations which just have not yet been discovered, is that right?
I think there's possibly a whole spectrum of explanations, and one should not jump either to saying something is utter bilge and nonsense, or jump to the other conclusion that we are being visited. There are probably hypotheses and answers in between.
But Keyhoe tells of a case he knows that convinces him flying saucers exist.
This was a report by the commander of a Navy Super Constellation transport, which was flying the Atlantic from from Europe to Gander, bringing back Navy crews that had been on duty in the European area. They were flying at 19,000 feet and about 100 miles out of Gander when they saw some lights down apparently on the surface of the water very close to it. The captain banked to take a look, and immediately these lights spread out very rapidly and disappeared except for one, which came straight up toward them and, of course, increasing in size. And when it got to their level, it could be seen as a huge flying disc about 350 feet in diameter. They described it as roughly a diameter 4 times the wingspan of the Connie. This object came at them so rapidly that the commander and everyone in the cockpit thought they were going to be hit head on. It flipped to one side, passed the wing, and came back so swiftly that no one knows whether it merely stopped and reversed or whether it made a lightning-like turn and came back. But at any rate, within a few moments, it was back pacing this Navy transport. It did it for about 10 seconds, and then it tilted up and climbed out of sight at a speed of about between 2 and 3 Machs. That was in 1956. But I regard it as an especially important case because this commander, they were all interrogated by Air Force intelligence at Gander and later by Naval intelligence when they got down to Patuxent. 2 days later, the commander was visited by a scientist from a super secret agency in Washington, and that's as far as I'll go to naming it, but you can guess what it was. He had a folder of photographs, not sketches, but photographs, and he showed these to the commander, and the commander said it looked just about like this one, and picked out a photograph of a flying disc. And then he asked the scientist, said, I had always thought this was nonsense, until the other night we were scared to death by this thing. What's going on? And in effect, the scientist said, thank you, Commander, and picked up his photographs and left.
In an effort to balance this program with all views, I asked the Air Force for a spokesman to present more of the official reaction to UFOs. I was told the Air Force has no spokesman because, I was told, every time a spokesman is put on the air or in print, somebody tries to make the Air Force look silly. Incidentally, the CBS television network will present a special program this summer concerning UFOs, and the Air Force has named a spokesman for that program. I asked Lieutenant Colonel Hal Harlan, Chief of the Broadcasting Branch of the Air Force Office of Information, why them and not us. He said they had promised to make the Air Force look good. That may be one of the few times a federal official has openly stated he will help those who make him or them look good. The Air Force did provide me with a 12-page pamphlet concerning their investigations, which works under the code name Project Blue Book. From that pamphlet, this statement. To date, the firm conclusions of Project Blue Book are: 1. No unidentified flying object reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever given any indication of threat to our national security. 2. There has been no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. And 3. There has been no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. You'll recall that Al Chop was the information officer in the early 50s for the Air Force, and he investigated about a dozen incidents during that time. What does he, personally and as a representative of no organization, what does he think they are?
In the early days of this investigation, I was like most everyone else. I believe that a startling piece of news was imminent, that we would find that these things were interplanetary spaceships. And the evidence at that time, at least the eyewitness sightings, seemed to point that way, and so perhaps it was wishful thinking in a way, because man is always intrigued about the possibility of intelligent life on other planets or from other star systems visiting us, and perhaps giving us the benefit of a very advanced technology. However, the lack of these things to come to pass over the past 20 years, I am now quite convinced that this is a natural phenomena of some sort that will continue, and I don't see any end to the controversy of whether they are interplanetary vehicles or not interplanetary vehicles. And I don't think anything can be proved from a scientific standpoint, because there is a lack of material substance that can be analyzed.
Dr. Bruce Rogers is Professor Emeritus of Mechanical Engineering from the University of Texas, and incidentally a member of the Board of Governors of NICAP. What does he think?
I mean, there's no use of arguing about the matter. Let's get some measurements if we can.
We found most university professors in such fields as physics, astronomy, and so on extremely reluctant to comment on flying saucers. Even some who told us flatly, "I don't believe in the things," refused to say that on the air. There were several, though, who felt the public has a right to know how scientifically trained minds regard these UFOs. Such a man is Dr. Tom Hudson, Assistant Professor of Physics at the University of Houston. Again, the simple question, what are they?
Well, certainly, out of all of the observations that have been made, some people saw something, and I don't know how much more than that you can say. Some of the observations have been made by people who are trained to make observations, such as the deputy sheriff, or in some cases, say, an airline pilot sees something, or someone else who's a trained observer, but does not have a scientific background. The trouble with trying to then break this further down is it's the person who's trying to analyze and discover what this object was that was seen has to take statements from a non-scientific person and extrapolate these statements into what he thinks the scientific explanation of what this individual saw could be. And the problems here are just insurmountable. In fact, in any other form of scientific research, this would be that you just wouldn't accept such an observation as being a valid scientific observation. But this is the best you have in this case, so you try to go from there.
Richard Hall, Assistant Director of NICAP, disagrees.
A number of astronomers, physicists, chemists, mathematicians, biologists, and other trained scientists, including engineers, have reported UFOs. One section of our report will detail their sighting.
The director of Houston's Burke Baker Planetarium is Dr. Armand Iramadige. KPRC's Ray Norton spent quite a bit of time with this astronomer discussing what UFOs may or may not be. Dr. Iramadige gave this answer to Ray's question of what are they, and the answer is so complete it may stand as a basic lesson in flying saucer watching.
By definition, we say UFOs, unidentified flying objects. Unidentified means that they must not be known celestial objects or known celestial phenomena or known natural phenomena. And of course, in the planetarium field, in the astronomical field, we know these celestial objects, what they might be. Many people report even meteors or bolides, that is, very large meteors or fireballs that are seen in the sky. They stream through the sky and sometimes in red or blue or white or green. They're immense fireballs. They're not seen frequently, but every now and then they do streak through the sky, and they're large objects that strike through the Earth's atmosphere and burn up. And as they burn up, of course, we see this tremendous glow. These, of course, are identifiable. We know, and we can, by good description and through several observations, be able to identify these as, and therefore they are no longer UFOs. The reason I want to bring this up before answering your question more directly is because we do get a lot of calls.
Does the planetarium get calls?
Yes. We do get calls frequently about these things, and also the Air Force frequently will call us when they get a report and they want to see if this report might have a celestial explanation, something astronomical. And so I just want to take advantage of this point right now and and indicate some of the things that have been seen and were definitely celestial. Another important thing that is seen frequently is the planet Venus. The planet Venus is an extremely brilliant planet in the mornings now. It can be seen before the sun rises around 5:30 in the morning, and it's so extremely brilliant, so much more brilliant than any other star or other celestial object, that people frequently are just surprised at seeing this tremendously bright object in the eastern sky. And since the Earth rotates, it rises in the east and goes higher and higher in the sky until the sun comes up, so they see it move. And for the moment, they might not be aware that the whole sky is moving because of Earth rotation. So this is another object that we frequently get with this, another object that is referred to as unidentified until they check and find that it could be the planet Venus. There are other celestial objects. A person, for example, noticed that there was a star close to the moon, and a few hours later the star was at a different place in the sky with respect to the moon. The reason for this is that the moon revolves around the Earth, and over a period of 1 hour, an object will move 1 Earth diameter away from its previous position. That is, the moon is moving toward the east. The star would move to the west from the moon, 1 moon diameter every hour. And so these objects are seen to move, and again, they cannot explain what it is. And of course, here's a known object, just a star, and the motion of the moon causes it to move that way. Other objects that people see are satellites, such as the Echo 1 and 2 and Pegasus. Some are going in a polar orbit, that is moving roughly north and south, and others east-west and east to west direction, or vice versa. So these are moving star-like objects. Some glow rather brilliantly.
Are there particular times in the orbit when the sun will catch them and make them blend?
Exactly. In fact, that's another thing that makes them strange. They expect to see it lit up from one horizon to the other. But it might be that a satellite will glow close to the horizon and then blink off because it goes into the Earth's shadow. It's eclipsed, in effect, by the Earth's shadow. Others will glow only while they're close to the zenith. because they're low enough that only when they are at a high point will the sun's glow reflect on them. And others, of course, at different portions of their orbit will glow. So these objects, it seemed, usually it will occur only once. It will not blink twice. It will, while it's eclipsed, be dark. It will brighten and then, of course, become dark again. So satellites is another celestial phenomena that's frequently misinterpreted because people do not look up the sky enough and realize what some of the things can be. And of course, as we said, meteors and bolides are moving, moving very quickly, and there are not too many bolides, but nevertheless, that is frequently reported. The planet Jupiter is a very brilliant one. It does not twinkle. None of the planets, when they're relatively high in the sky, twinkle. Only when they're low, close to the horizon, do planets twinkle. Stars twinkle. So twinkling objects usually are stars, and if they're give a steady light of planets, Jupiter at times, because people don't realize that the planet can be so bright, is reported as an unknown. Now, getting to your initial question, which I avoided with good reason, what are these UFOs? These that cannot be identified as natural phenomena, either celestial or meteorological, that is a weather type of thing. I might mention before going to this, you see I'm trying to avoid your question.
Anyone does.
A sundog is another object that can be seen during the daytime. There's a halo, sometimes two halos, around the sun. And sometimes one tiny portion of this halo, 22 or 46 degrees away from the sun, just a tiny portion of it glows, and it may be red or some other color of the rainbow, or just white. And so it appears at these two angles from the sun. It's due to refraction from the high ice particles in the sky. And so sometimes these appear as unknown objects.
In other words, you would say that a great percentage of the many thousands of sightings can be contributed to astronomical and celestial phenomena.
Yes. In fact, recently you might have heard of this object that struck a car on Highway 10.
That's right.
We don't know what it was. We investigated it. We searched through all the areas where the grass was relatively sharp, but there are areas that have cattails and deep grass, and so the object might have ricocheted into off the road, and so we cannot report on that. But that could have been a meteorite, and of course it was in hopes that it was that we did this search. But now, once we eliminate all these, and that's where maybe many thousands of these objects end up as being, we arrive at these that are unidentified, really cannot be explained by science today. There was one, for example, two colonels saw, they were command pilots working in the Pentagon, and it's reported in Project Blue Book. They saw two objects, two delta wing objects, stream by them extremely fast, and they knew that the speed of these, they know the delta wings, they knew the F-86s perfectly well, and this, I think, was in 1952. It was during around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and yet they were going towards Salt Lake City over Carson Sink in Nevada. Yet they knew that that no airplane could have gone at that speed. They saw no canopy or tail on it. This was going at a tremendous speed by their plane. They worked for the Pentagon. They knew perfectly well how to recognize anything that the United States has in the air. These two objects streamed by them, extremely fast speed, and took a slight bank and then disappeared. There were no known F-86s or other possible airplanes that could have been that close to them. This is a UFO, a valid UFO. At least it cannot be identified. And then the question that you asked me is difficult to answer. We don't know what celestial phenomena can explain certainly we know of no celestial phenomena at this time, science does not know, that could explain these types of sightings. And it's for this reason that no one wishes to be to comment on as to what they could be. We just don't know. People who are highly scientifically trained and should certainly identify the known objects that it could possibly be will not say what it was. They know what they saw and they describe what they saw. And certainly this is the reason that right now the Secretary of the Air Force is being prodded into establishing a committee, possibly of civilians, to study these phenomena, what they are. Of course, I can't say what they are. All we can say is that these people must see something and that they're not creating a hoax or lying. They're seeing something and we just can't define what it is.
Finally, we ask our favorite question of a man who had seen something that cannot be explained. Chief Deputy Billy McCoy, what was it?
I have no earthly idea what it is on this earth. Could have a craft like we saw, and could have kept it from the public this long. I don't believe that if they had a craft, I mean, I do believe that if they had a craft of this kind, that it certainly wouldn't have been down in the area at night that we saw it in, just fooling around.
Still confused? On the next section of Spectrum 95, coming up in a few minutes, we'll discuss some of the theories and the charges of Air Force secrecy. But now, let's pause for the news. Spectrum 95, Part 3, The Flying Saucer Flap, Energy Pockets, and Little Green Men. Somehow, long ago, the conception of little green men became attached to flying saucers. The effect is more serious than it sounds on the surface, because many persons, fearing ridicule by their friends, will spot an object and refuse to report it, because jokers will say, "Did you see any little green men?" Don Berliner is a freelance science writer who makes his home in Washington. But most of his time is spent away from the typewriter and out as a volunteer for NICAP. He recently talked about men from other worlds.
As reports of UFOs, the great majority of these reports are in the hoax category. As the Major mentioned, the late George Adamski made quite a stir some years ago, writing books about his fanciful trips to various planets in flying saucers and the golden-haired space beings that he had met. We investigated this man quite thoroughly because of all the stir that he created, and discovered that most of his claimed background was completely fraudulent. He claimed at one time to be an astronomer from Mount Palomar. Now, this is rather impressive on the face of it. It turns out that he was located at Mount Palomar, and he had a telescope, but the telescope was parked right outside his hamburger stand. This is, unfortunately, the sort of thing we do run into. However, there is at least one case of a reported occupant of a UFO, which seems quite substantial. The Air Force agrees with us that the case is definitely not explainable as anything conventional. It occurred in April of '64 in Socorro, New Mexico, where a highly respected police officer who had had quite a bit of experience tracking meteors with the New Mexico Institute of Meteoritics reported seeing two small suited occupants near a UFO, which after it left imprints in the ground and scorch marks on the mesquite bushes and the earth. Dr. Hynek, the Air Force investigator, was on the scene, and our man was on the scene. And when Dr. Hynek left, he admitted openly that he was more puzzled than when he had arrived. So this is perhaps the only case where an occupant of one of these craft has been reported, which has really stood up under investigation.
Could there be life elsewhere in this universe? Armand Iramadegay.
It's my assumption, and I think I'm right, that it's not beyond the realm of possibility that there is some form of life on another planet in our galaxy or around another star, another sun. Is this right?
I think that is quite possible. In fact, it's probable that among the billions of stars in our own galaxy, there would be many that would have planets. In fact, many of the stars have other stars going around them, and these are called binary stars. So it's not at all impossible that in the same fashion in which such a tremendous number of stars do have other bodies going around them, that these other bodies could be totally inert, that is, planets that go around them. And these planets, in all probability, somewhere in our galaxy, among these billions of stars, certainly it's within the realm of possibility that there could be life on some of these planets that have evolved through normal changes of temperature as these planets would form.